I don't like the fact that you're so far away, so I'm going to come down there and stand somewhere. And you have full permission to get up and come up here to the table or go to the wine places, whatever you want to do. I won't bother you, and I won't count how many times you get up. So enjoy yourselves and feel relaxed. It's my great privilege to be here tonight. A couple of years ago, I was over at Port Townsend. And you know, you don't get to Port Townsend unless you need to get to Port Townsend. And so I got there, and they had a little reception in a house that they were working on. A house that had not been completed yet, but they had the volunteers come in, and of course I was standing there, and so as people came in, they said, "Oh, you're the reason we're here." And I would always say to each one of them, "That's funny, you're the reason I'm here." And so you are the reason that I'm here tonight. And I'm on a 6-week speaking tour of different parts of the country for Habitat. I didn't know they were going to keep using me after I retire, but they do. So when affiliates want me, all they have to do is pay my travel. I don't require any cost. And so this was the reason I came, literally this. I got the invitation to come and speak here. And then we put the word out to a number of other affiliates, and the word leaked out across the states, and so now I'm here for 6 weeks of speaking. But this and your group is the reason that I'm here, because I got the invitation from Mary to come up. And the good news in that is that when I'm willing to split it up with others, then we can split up the cost of that awful ticket up from Guatemala and back. So anyway, I am delighted to be here. You heard a little bit about my early involvement with Habitat when Millard Fuller and his wife had helped create this vision at Koinonia Farm, where Habitat was started in South Georgia. They then went off to Africa, and they worked for 3 years over there. And you know, everything has a formal starting. Habitat for Humanity was founded the 3rd week of September in 1976. And so that's where all the official paperwork says, and that sort of thing. But there were some young people who worked with the Fullers when they were in Africa before it was Habitat for Humanity. And I got a kick out of meeting one some years later, and he said, "I'll tell you when Habitat was founded." He said, "We were sitting around the dinner table one night with Millard and Linda, and Millard said, 'Don't you think it'd be a good idea if there was an international organization to do this around the world?' And he said, when Millard spoke like that, that meant there was going to be such a thing. And so that's when Habitat was founded. But they came home, and they discovered that I was still around the area. And Millard was looking for warm bodies. Anybody in this room would have done. But he found me. And he asked me to come out to Koinonia and see their slides of Africa. I had been using their slides and other things from Africa in my history classes with kids I was teaching at the time. And so I said, sure, I'll come out and see them. So I go out to Koinonia. Millard is there. His 14-year-old son is there. And 3 or 4 rather elderly black women were there. And they're sitting there watching these slides, and about every third, this is old-fashioned ones, you know, that you click the thing and you can hear it go ka-chunk, ka-chunk every time you change. About every third slide, Millard would go, "I know the next volunteer presider is in this room tonight." And it didn't take me long looking around to realize the fool was talking about me. And I hadn't the least idea of going to Africa. Well, I did go to Africa. It was a long struggle for Millard. We did a lot of bargaining. I made him start a housing project in Americus, Georgia, and we did a number of things back and forth, but I finally went, and it was a great and wonderful experience. But what really got me to go to Habitat was that one day I was teaching in a classroom in Dawson, Georgia, and I had not a single child in that school. You can imagine what those schools were like after the civil rights issues, and most of the whites abandoned the schools, so primarily African American, a few very poor white kids. Not a single kid in our 7th and 8th grade could read his or her name in block letters a mile high, as my father said. They couldn't read, and they were in the 7th and 8th grade. Fortunately, I had a degree in the teaching of reading at secondary school level, so I was desperately trying to teach them to read. And one day a little girl he says, why do we have to learn this old stuff anyway? And I said, because if you get an education, you'll have a better life. That's what any one of you would have said to that child. She came back at me like that and said, yeah, that's what they told my mom. So that evening, I went to see her mom. I found them living in a cornfield, in an old shack that probably dated back to the time of slavery. There were no doors, there were no windows, there was no running water, there was no electricity, and there was no hope. And I left that house and I went straight back to Americus, and I found Miller and I said, all right, you win. I will waste my life in a classroom trying to teach kids who live in those conditions. I've got to get to them at a more basic level. One of the things that I'm doing in this country this 6 weeks as I talk to groups is talking about a multiplier that I use with housing and with habitat work, because one of the workshops that I'll do here in a couple of weeks in Colorado has to do with how to tell your affiliates economic impact. How many of you here have ever been involved with the Chamber of Commerce? A few hands go up. If you've been involved with the Chamber of Commerce, you know that we always multiply the economic activity. And there is a standard multiplier out there that is a 7. Very few people alive know where that number came from, but it's a very popular number. And so I use it a lot in speeches and in this economic impact work that I do with affiliates. I talk about flip those dollars 7 times and tell people that's the value in your community. Now the truth is there are a number of different numbers. The construction industry really uses about a 2 or a 3, and then there are some other different numbers that can be used. But for my life and for my experience, I want to tell you the story of 3 African American women in Americus, Georgia, who because people always say to me, well, we know what happened to you after your experience with that young woman. What happened to her? How do I really know? I went off to my big adventure. I was a young man with freedom and the ability to go wander off to Africa and do other things. Who knows what happened to her? I wouldn't imagine that very good things happened to her because she couldn't read at the 7th grade. I imagine that things got worse from there. Perhaps she got pregnant, perhaps she dropped out of school, who knows, but she didn't, I imagine, finish her high school education. But some years later, after my time in Africa, and I'm back in Americus, we built a house for a young woman named May Pearl Denmark. May Pearl moved into her house with 4 young daughters. She got settled in, and that house went downhill about as fast as a house could go downhill. It happens. We work with human beings. Not every story is an absolute success. And May Pearl was threatening to be a pretty awful failure. So we were trying to work with her. That's when Family Partnership was born, when we started trying to figure out how to help May Pearl. We had committee after committee talking to her and trying to get things fixed up. Nothing was working. Millard Fuller asked me one time, he says, what do you do when you go past May Pearl's house to distract people? Because both of us took people through that neighborhood. Distract people from that awful mess. Well, I'm a bird watcher, so, I told him, I said, one time I pointed out an ivory-billed woodpecker flying on. Look, that's the last one. It's gone extinct everywhere else. Get people to look anywhere but at that house. But while we were doing all our working and praying and hoping that May Pearl would come around, her neighbors came to see her, all of whom were women, all of whom were Habitat homeowners. They came in and they sat down in her living room and they said, May Pearl, we've come to talk to you about your house. And May Pearl burst into tears. And she said, y'all, it ain't my fault. That is, by the way, good English where I come from. Y'all, it ain't my fault. And one of them spoke up and said to her, May Pearl, we didn't come here about fault. We came here to tell you that if you want to get your house fixed up, we'll help you. Now, is that not the core of the Christian message for those of us who worship in a Christian church? Not about fault. If you're ready to change your life, then let's do it. And that's what they said to May Pearl. And she wanted to get it fixed up, and they did, and so they worked together, and they got her house fixed up. And the second time, the vaccination took. If we were in Americus, Georgia right now, I'd have you in front of me across the house saying, this is the house I told you about. But what happened next was even more miraculous. May Pearl went off to our local technical college and got her GED. She had never gotten her high school diploma. So when people ask me what happened to the little girl, I tell them, May Pearl was not a little girl. She wasn't, of course. I don't know that she could be tagged as that. But she was an example of what can happen. It is never too late. When that young woman was ready to learn, no force on earth will hold her back. And as long as she wasn't ready to learn, no force on earth was going to make her learn. But May Pearl went and got her GED. Turned out that none of the other women had ever finished high school. And even they considered her to be the least among them. So it set off a wildfire among them as they all started going to get their GEDs. And I heard about it, and I called May Pearl in, and I said, May Pearl, here's $35. It's your graduation present. Well, it costs $35 to take the GED test. And I said, you tell your friends, when they bring me a passing score, they'll get $35 too. A day didn't go by that I didn't hear about the progress. Yeah. And I remember going out there to see Minnie Westbrook, 56 years old on that day, walk across that stage in a little plastic thing that you use at a picnic table, cloth or something. It was just a little plastic gown and a little cap, and pick up that GED. And then, one right after the other, they went across that stage. Until it got down to one last one named Jessie. And Jessie began to make excuses and say, I don't like to drive at night. I don't like to go out there by myself now that my friends are all done. It was May Pearl who went to the other women and said, we cannot let Jessie fail. We're going to set up a driving schedule. We're going to go out there and sit in class and take a book and read, or if we're still doing some other studies, we'll study. We'll do everything we'll take that test for. We'll hold her hand if we have to. But we cannot let Jessie fail. And the day finally came, of course, when Jessie walked across that stage and got her GED. Now, for me, I've long since answered the question, did I make the right decision leaving that classroom in Dawson, Georgia, and wandering the earth on behalf of Habitat? Because that's only one out of many, many stories I can tell you.